Okay, we're continuing from last week. I at the end spoke about Kashering from fleishiks to milchiks, and whether that applies to Kashering from to parav also. We spoke about the Magen. I'll just recap for a second. The Magen Avram says in Hilchos Yontif that now there's a minute to not kasher from milchiks to fleishiks or from fleishiks to milchiks. He came into our din over here, and we talked about that. From the Magen Avram, it seemed very clear that his svara should apply to going from milchiks to parav also, from fleishiks to parav, because as far as you might use the kli by mistake for the wrong kind. So what's the difference if it's milchiks, if we're going from milchiks to fleishiks and milchiks to parav? And I just question that there are people who let people do that, and we question where that came from. So afterwards, Yossi showed me some premise in that direction. So we're going to continue that to see that in fact there is a basis to saying such a shita.
Saying what? To
say that you might, even though the minig is to not go from milchiks to fleishiks or from fleishiks to milchiks, to go from one of those to parav, you'd be allowed to. I'm not saying you can't. I'm saying there's basis to say that. Okay. The thing is like this. He showed me there's a marsham and the Yad Yehuda. The marsham, which is what I'll give you afterwards, has two parts to it. We're going to do the second part first. And the second part, he says, the minig is limited to what it was. We don't want to extend minhagim. So the minig is milchiks to fleishiks or fleishiks to milchiks. So to parav does not include the minig. You don't take the minig any further. Which, of course, is a chiddush because the minig has a sense to it. You shouldn't make mistakes. So the same thing from milchiks to fleishiks and milchiks to parav. It's not really an extension of the minig. Okay. But that's what he says. You don't want to extend the minig. And the Yad Yehuda says, who's the Yad Yehuda?
Yad Yehuda.
It's a very lengthy pirush on Yerdeh, on like the Basar B'chol Term was parts of Yerdeh, and it's so long that he has two parts. He has a pirush HaKatzir and a pirush Aruch. Okay, and it's very lengthy. There's a lot in there. Most people don't look at it because they just can't make it all the way through to the end.
I will tell you. But I'll tell you that Rabbi first holds that if you have a machayis a paiskim and the Yad Yehuda says something, you follow the Yad Yehuda. You'd like to place the Gachrim.
Okay, fine. There's a ringing endorsement. Eddie has the Yad Yehuda says, the Yad Yehuda, it is Kutzer, actually, the son says, he says, Pasha to him that doesn't apply to Parav. He doesn't say any reason. Pasha that doesn't apply to Parav. So, we didn't think of any sort of why it should make a difference the way the Magen Avram says, but Yossi said, he understands this far. He says, what's the problem? You might use something from, let's say, the fleishik, and I might use it for milchiks. But in order to use the thing that's parav incorrectly, you would have to first of all forget that you made it, that you haven't kashered yet. So you think it's parav, but it's really fleishik. And then the thing that you cut, you think it's parav. So you cut a tomato with it. Then you have to eat that thing with milchiks. So you have to make two mistakes in order to have a problem. So maybe that's more far-fetched, as opposed to if it's a fleishik knife, you think it's milchiks, so you might cut a piece of cheese with it. That's more serious.
I don't know about killing for cooking, it's like for cutting.
But same thing. For now, we'll say it.
I don't know, if you cook farm and the fleishik the thing, it's fine, right?
Right, so it's a shayla of not l'chachila. So you're saying that there's just a chumrah, that itself is a reason to not go further.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll see something like that in a minute. Okay, so that's along the lines of what Yossi saying, that in order to go wrong, it's a lot harder to go wrong in this case. Two steps. You have to make more mistakes, or even if you make a mistake, you won't get that bad off. It'll only be not for that.
There's a different issue. When you are a fleishik knife, you use the familchik. In kasha, you use the familchik, and then you're using it back for fleishik. You messed up. If you have a parav, and then you use the familchik all for fleishik, you didn't mess anything up. You didn't do anything wrong.
No, the other way.
The first step you did.
No, the other way. If you thought you got the parav mode, you made it parav, but it's really still fleishiks, then you can make a mistake. Then you can cut a tomato and use.
If he takes a fleishik knife, right? You don't allow him to kasher it and make it milchik, because he might forget, and you have to use it for milchik, use it for fleishik.
Right.
So he's got a problem. He went from milchik to fleishik, fleishik to milchik. So if you take a fleishik knife and you kasher it and you make it parav, what's the mistake that he's going to make?
I'll tell you, because if you keep going,
go back and forth.
No, we're talking about going. The Magen Avram says if you kasher back, if you kasher from one to the other, you'll end up having just one set of dishes, and you'll keep switching it back and forth, and you'll lose track of what you were up to. So 5 years down the road, you keep switching it every 2 days. You go back and forth. It's not a one-time thing. You keep going back and forth, so you're going to lose track of what you're up to, and you'll. Okay. So there's a raya to this. There's machlokes like this. The Mechaber says that if you have a fleishik knife, okay, you're not allowed to use that knife to cut cheese, even though it's cold. because of the end that's on the edge, on the side of the knife. Not only that, you can even cut a part of the food with it. If you can't even cut bread, his example, you can't even cut bread with it, because then you'll eat that bread together with the milchiks. That's what the Mechaber says. So the Ramah says, but then you can avoid that problem. You could use the fleishik knife for cutting things by doing the Eitzah. If we talk about this, you can do the Eitzah. That's the way to get the shanunis off the knife, and then you'll be able to use it. That's what the Ramah says. He says, but the minig is to have two separate knives, not to do the Eitzah, not to be so much that you can do the Eitzah. You have two separate knives, okay, which already we're starting to hear hints of what the Magen Avraham said. Right? This Magen Avraham's minig to have separate things and not go back and forth. We're starting to hear that. That's what the Ramah is saying. Okay, so on that Ramah, there's a machlokes. The Taz says, when the Ramah said the minig is to have two knives, he meant only on the first case, when you could use a meat knife for cheese. But the second case, when you use a meat knife for bread, that's not a problem. That you could be samach on the Eitzah. That's what the Taz says. When the Ramah says that the minig is to not be samach on the Eitzah, and instead have two separate ones, he meant this for milchiks and fleishiks. But for milchiks and parf, he had no problem. And that the Ramah, there's no such minig, there's no problem doing the Eitzah back and forth from milchiks and parf. And the Pri Megadim says, no, what are you talking about? Pri Megadim on that passage, no, not true. The Magen Avraham minig applies even to go, even like this also. You can't do the Eitzah from the milchiks to parf also. When the Ramah says the minig is to have two separate knives, he means it even for the second case of the Mechaber, which is to cut bread with the fleishik knife. Okay, so here we're seeing the simple reading of the Taz and the Pri Megadim is that their machlokes is whether this minig applies even to cases going to parf. The Taz says no problem. You can have two separate knives going from. You could do the Eitzah. I mean, you could kasher between fleishiks and parv. And the Pri Megadim says that it's not true, that the minig applies even in that case also. Okay? So for now we're going to hold it like that. There's a machlokes. It seems a machlokes the time of the Pri Megadim. So now we want to see a basis. We have a Marsham and a Yad Yehuda saying that there's no minig. And now we have even an earlier source to it that the Taz himself is saying that there's no problem going from milchiks to parv. Okay? I want you just to hold that because we'll see another shot in the Taz in a second. Okay. Another possible way to explain why people go from milchiks to parv is a different thing. Not that you're allowed to go from milchiks to parv, that you're not allowed to do. But you're allowed to do through libun. If you do libun, then you're allowed to go from milchiks to parv, from fleishiks to parv, or from milchiks to parv. And the whole minig is only by hakol. So of course, the first reaction to that is, the Magen Avraham is talking about libun. The Magen Avraham is on a Mechaber that says, as if libun is more serious. We'll see in a second why libun is going to be different. If it has to be in any banyan. Yes, correct. Well, you see, I'm going to get to it in a second. What's the difference? Right. So
you lose track. What's the difference?
Yeah.
Can I ask you to hold a second? Just hold it. It's coming. Of course, the Magen Avraham was talking about the Mechaber's case was a case of libun. The Mechaber says he's not talking about Shavuos, but it sure sounds like Shavuos. If you make a cheese dish on Yontif, and now you want to make a fleishik dish, so you're allowed to kasher, even though you're not allowed to kasher on Yontif, because you're going to do libun, and therefore you have to heat the piece of metal anyhow before you cook it. So it's not niruk masakin, that's the issue with the kasher, it's niruk masakin. It's not niruk masakin because you preheat it anyhow before you cook on it. So there's nothing, to the outside observer, he doesn't see you doing the kashering, it's not niruk masakin, you're allowed to do it. So on that, the Magen Avraham says, wait a second, but there's a minig to not go from milchiks to fleishiks. Okay, so that's what the Magen Avraham was talking about on that thing. So he's talking about the case is a case of libun. Okay, so the Magen Avraham of course holds that this minig applies even by libun. He even asks the Mechaber is a steer to what I'm saying. Okay, and the Pri Megadim makes this point a bunch of times that it applies to libunos. But the beginning of the Marsham says he has a different shot. He says, I don't understand what the Magen Avraham says. The Magen Avraham says you're not allowed to go from milchiks to fleishiks because you might make a mistake. He says, make a mistake. I forgot to tell you one piece. He says, make a mistake. He says, you'll put a mark on the kli as to whether it's milchiks or fleishiks. He says, the Ramah that said beforehand that you have to have two separate knives, the Ramah ends off. And what you do is, the minig is that the mark is on the milchik knife. You put a mark on the milchik knife, it's the minig based on something. The mark is on the milchik knife. This is just like the Ramah says, you put a mark on the milchik knife, so we'll put a mark on it. We'll put we'll put a blue sticker on it when it's this way, and a red sticker when it's that way. We'll make a mark when we subtract. He says he doesn't say
there's a difference between permanent and temporary.
Right. So that's an obvious question. What he's saying is that the Ramah is talking about you make one time, you put a mark on the tape, on the thing. And him, the problem is you're going to forget to put the little sticker on. That's exactly right. But that's what the Marsham asks. He says he doesn't the same shot like the Magen Avraham. He doesn't think that's the minig. What's shot in the minig? Shot in the minig is based on the Shar Melech. Talks about this minig. And the Shar Melech says that the reason for the minig is that you're afraid that the guy's going to kasher before it's Ein Ben Yom. If you kasher once in a blue moon, you'll pay attention to what you're doing. If you're kashering all the time back and forth, you might forget and lose track of what you're up to, and you'll kasher when it's a Ben Yom, and therefore there's a minute to not kasher back and forth. So you have to have separate dishes. I mean, when you make mistakes, you'll kasher. But as a rule, you have to have separate dishes, because if you keep kashering, you'll make a mistake and you go to Ben Yom. You're by mistake. So Mamela, he says, so in cases of Libun, the whole minute is only by Hagolah. By Libun, that you can do when it's a Ben Yom, you can't go wrong. Whenever you kasher, whatever you do, it'll always work. It won't make a difference. Because that's what he says.
Libun Gomer?
He doesn't talk about Libun Gomer or Libun Kal. But
is there a difference for Ben Yom?
Yes, I'm about to say. That's it.
If you're in New York, and Libun Kal.
There's no difference.
New York, they kasher.
Why should the
Libun Kal?
The difference. Okay, the difference.
You got to for the studies. The different house, right? Of Ben Yom, but the blades go back.
No.
But even Kal blades are not going to go back.
Okay, so the Libun Gomer you for sure could do when it's a Ben Yom. Primugazim says, it seems to him that when you do Libun Kal, it doesn't burn the blias, it draws the blias out like Hagolah. And he says, an Efsher, that's what he says, an Efsher, that if so, you should have to wait till it's Ein Ben Yom. Okay, as if there's a possibility that the blias they're going to come out and they would go back in. And which, of course, like David's saying, which is the sort is that, what do you mean? If it goes out, yes, even let's say it draws it out, how can it go back in? There's no liquidator to let it get back in. Okay, so I've heard from Rabbi Belz, Rabbi Schechter, and most people assume that you can do Libun Kal even when it's a Ben Yom. They're not machmir to the Pri Megadim. Pri Megadim himself doesn't even say you have to do it. He says, Efsher, that you should have to wait till the end of Ben Yom. They're not waiting for that. But so in which case, this Masham would be about Libun Kal also. Okay? And the Pashtus is that the case of the Mechaber, he says that his answers up the so to speak, steer between the Minig and the Mechaber. Because the Mechaber is talking about Libun, and the Minig is not by Libun. Okay, so the Mechaber, L'chayra, is doing Libun Kal. Okay, to go from milchik to fleishiks, you don't have to do Libun Gomer. So he means Libun Kal. Okay, so he's going by Libun Kal. But now the Marsham has the Marsham has another case where he says you don't have to do where the minig doesn't apply, which is the case he's talking about. Okay, which is if the belia happened only in a way that's not barnat, like in his case, where a hot liquid poured under a part of a pot. Okay, that's what happened. A hot milk poured under a part of a pot. So that's the case. That's a real mat barnat. That's not Aydei Bishul even. The Aydei Bishul he doesn't say. But he says in that case there's no minute because then you can kasher ben yom because the blias is not barnat. There won't be any problems with the blias also. Okay, so the Marsham, this is what he says first. The Marsham, like the Shara Melech, that the minig only applies to cases when you can't kasher the ben yom. It's either by libun or in his case where it's not libun but it's not barnat. You can kasher ben yom. So he says there's no minig in that case also. So just and with this, if I didn't mention, he answers the mysterious to the Machab. So now, if you think about it just for a second, if this is true, then we don't have to say what we said before in the Taz. The Taz is not necessarily saying that the minig doesn't apply for milchus to fleishiks. The Taz said when you for milchus to parv. The Taz said when you're going from milchus to fleishiks, there's a minig you're not supposed to have. You have two separate sets of knives. But when you want to do the Ne'itza from Fleishiks to Par, it's not a problem. Okay, maybe that's different over there because Ne'itza is something that can be done Ben Yoimai. So in that case, there's no minig to switch constantly because you can do it Ben Yoimai. Maybe he's saying like Charmel, that you can go back and forth, not because Milchiks to Par is different than Milchiks to Fleishiks. Meaning, Milchiks and Fleishiks and Milchiks to Par is all the same thing. Just the difference is it's Ne'itza or Hagolah. And the eats is what you can do ben yomai. Why does he say that you have to have two separate knives? That's like a separate minig. You have to have two separate knives. That's just a thing, which is really comes from our din that we were learning that you're supposed to have separate knives for Pesach, and for that also that would be like the separate minig. Okay. Anyhow, so to summarize, if you read the Magen Avraham, the simple reading of the Magen Avraham, which is what most people know the minig from, and the Mishnah brings the minig just from the Magen Avraham, you would assume the minig applies even if you're going to Parav, and even if you're doing Libun. But we've seen that there's a Marsham and the Yad Yehuda who say this, and maybe a Taz, that from Milchik to Parv there's no minig, and then there's a Shara Melech that the Marsham brings that maybe doesn't apply to Libun. Okay, something. So we've seen, this whole thing which is just a minig, there's lots
most of... Most places are not worried then?
I didn't say most. I said is that there's good basis for saying that you should be able to kasher the Parv. Well, okay, if that's what you want to go with, that you should like that. But again, the simple reading of the Magen, which is where the minute comes from, is that you should not do this.
So, the way we finished last year was in the industrial setting, we had this big question.
Right, okay.
So it comes out now from this that there is yesh makom.
Right, so that's a good point. I didn't think of it like that. When we think that, we had asked at the end, is that how come in companies we should kasher all the time? Okay. So to which the answer may well be that since they go from milchiks to parv,
we don't kasher, we kasher with a beginner.
Well, we kasher all the time. We have one pot, and they sometimes make parv, sometimes they make milchiks in it. So they're kashering all the time. How can you kasher all the time? There's a minute to not.
You go back and forth.
Not all the
No. If there's a minute to not kasher back and forth, so how can you kasher all the time? So now we have a basis correct. They're always kashering from milchiks to parv, let's say, or from treif. Treif is for sure no minute. So then we could say that in that case, this is what to be samachan. Of course, the Magen Avraham problem that you might use the kalim wrong is very much
less.
It's much more in a company because they couldn't care beans about kashrus. They don't care anything about kashrus. It's not like in your house that it's important to you. To them, it's of no importance. You know what I mean? On the other side, yes, okay, correct. There's two sides. Yes, we said that also. Correct. There's whether it applies to
the question is whether
the people give us stuff to go right. Correct. Everyone. Cool. Well, we talked about that last week or 2 weeks ago. Everyone agrees that going don't have. That's not one Shem is saying that's to do with. Yes, the child said we have to be mouth. Okay. Okay, let's go.
Did you talk about Nitza at all? That what Nitza today means?
Yes.
So,
you can watch the video too.
I just want to say in Buffalo, there were people that were burying their pots.
They were what?
Burying their pots.
Burying?
That's a double punch. I've heard of burying knives, I've heard of.
Yeah, no, the double
burying pots.
You have to stick it. You can't bury it.
I know. I just told you. How long do they leave it?
I guess if they would have had a rabbi who's something, then they would have done better. Okay. Let's learn something in the Shulchan. Okay. You don't have to look inside. Kli rishon, we're in the middle of halacha gimel. Kli rishon nikra. We said you have to kasher a knife. It's significant. You have to kasher a knife for the kli rishon. A kli rishon nikra, sheresichu b'mayim ha'eish. A kli rishon is considered if you heat up water in that pot on the fire. Afilu eina ata ha'eish. Even if it's not on the fire still, rak shezenu resech, as long as it's still resech. Okay. Now, we're going to see in halacha hey that the din of kabbalah kachpotay applies. That if you did something in a kli rishon, you kasher in kli rishon. If you do a kli sheni, you kasher as a kli sheni. What's then if you did it? It's just a bunch of dargs like that. Even kli rishon, those different dargs. What happens if it was cooked in a kli rishon on the fire? Is there any difference if you kasher it on the fire or off the fire? Our Mechaber said that it's considered kli rishon even if it's off the fire. We know from Hilchos Shabbos.
I don't know if it's off the fire.
Okay, why?
It stops right away. I mean, unless you think about the temperature. It stops right away.
Probably depends how big it is also. No? That's the whole show.
Take up a big pot. Take up the size of the
For a few minutes, it stops bubbling. What you're saying is the bubbling stops. Right. Let's see it.
So the question is, how can it be? Okay, but before your question, it says something here. I feel in the RSL age, rather than with it. It says that too.
So we told me a cast iron pot, or a certain amount that retains heat longer.
Yeah, maybe I'm in the
okay, I don't think we're going to do it today, but we'll answer your question. We'll try to answer your question. Okay. No, it's a good question. Okay, but anyhow, so the Mechaber says here, we know that something that's not like Gabi Eish. Something that's not like Gabi Eish. Something that's not like Gabi Eish is considered. The Mechaber here says it's considered still a kli rishon, like we know from Hilchos Shabbos. But what happens if the blia originally happened in a kli rishon that was like Gabi Eish? Can you capture that thing with the kli rishon shalei Gabi Eish? Okay. So the tour in Yerdei and Kuf Chaf Aleph, which is the other symbol of Hagalos Kelim, for whatever reason, in Kuf Chaf Aleph is most of the Torah Beis Yosef, and in Kaf Nun Aleph is less Torah Beis Yosef, but there's more Shulchan Aruch.
Clarify what you mean by loyal variation means that you cook it off, and then you took it off and poured it over.
No. In the same pot. It's a kli rishon. You took the pot off the fire, you turned the fire off, and then you stick the fork into it. Rather than cooking while the bubbles are still coming up, while it's still, with a fire under it, you just cooked it. The water's still kli rishon, but you put it off the fire. I mean, if you take your chalon pot off the fire, it's still considered kli rishon.
The same halacha be that when they kasher a lot of things, you put in three things, it stops boiling for about 30 seconds. It does.
Right. No, that's a different thing. No, because even this thing that says you could do Shaloi Gabi Eish means Raksh Again Resech. It has to be Resech because you have to have a temperature of Resech. So that it says that if it cools off, you have to wait till it heats back up again. I'm talking about that it's going to stay hot, but it's just not on the fire.
Okay.
So the Ramah brings, the Tur brings 2 days as to whether that works or not. And the Beis Yosef says like the first day, the stricter day, which one? The stricter day says Kabbalah Kaf Potay. Just like we say the difference between a Klirishin and a Klisheni. So a Klirishin Agabi Eish has a stronger Bliya than Shloi Agabi Eish. Kabbalah Kaf Potay tells us however the Bliya happened, that they have to get it out. So if the Bliya happened Agabi Eish, you have to get it out. What?
Don't say that Eish. You don't want to mechalik within the Kabbalah Kaf Potay, within Eish, within Maya, Hashem Eish, Yolo Banoy, but between mind, the different kinds of mind.
So that's what the Mekilim say. That the Beis Yosef says. The others say not as dramatically as you, but the Beis Yosef says that the others hold that to say Klirishin, Klisheni, those are clear, differences between them. But Agabesh, Agabesh, that's already just like a minor difference. That's not significant enough to say you have to do one different. You don't say is my pot has to be the same width and the same. Everything has to be exactly the same. Only if something makes a difference. So there's no difference between Agabesh or Agabesh. It's fire. It's hot. It's hot. It's the temperature we're looking for. Or the Klirishin is what we're looking for, and that's not important enough to say that since it's Shaloi Agabesh, that should make it a difference. That's what Beis Yosef says in the two sheets. The Tur over there says he thinks that the stricter sheet is correct. That if the Bliya was Agabi Eish, then the Hagala has to be Agabi Eish also. Now the Mechaber in Halacha Hey, which we're not up to, but in Halacha Hey, you would think he doesn't say anything about being Agabi Eish. He says it was a Klirishin, to Hagala and Klirishin, Klisheni, he like that. He gives a bunch of rules. He doesn't say anything like Agabi Eish or Agabi Eish, which is odd when they say that in our din also brings this Shaila from the Tur. Okay, as to whether so the simple reading is, and the Mechaber by us is, what did he say? He says that Nayas you can kasher if it's as long as it's in a Klirishin, even if it's not Agabi Eish. So the simple reading here, we know the Beis Yosef told us Machlokes, right? This Beis Yosef on that Tur. So yet he doesn't say that you need Agabi Eish. He sounds like he's being Mako. Okay, the fact that he doesn't make a point of saying that Agabi Eish is different implies that he's being Mako. But that's what we would think. But the Pri Megadim says no. He says over here we're talking about a sakin. The Bliya of a sakin happens usually Shloi Agabi Eish. Since the Bliya Shloi Agabi Eish, that's why in this case the Mechaber says you can do Shloi Agabi Eish. But in the case when the Bliya would happen Agabi Eish, then you'd have to do Hagala Agabi Eish. And it's like the Shittas Hamachmirim that the Tur brings. Okay? Again, the simple reading of the Mechaber is not like that. The Mechaber says 2 times talking about Kashering in a Klirishin and making a difference about it. He doesn't say anything about Agabi Eish and Shloi Agabi Eish. Implying, and the only thing he does say is one case where he says even if it's not Agabi Eish. Okay, but the Pri Megadim says no, it's only special by the din of sakin.
There would be a big chilik. Well, it could come out with a major chilik. There's no difference. According to the sheet that will hold it, there's no difference between Agabi Eish and Agabi Eish. So if I stick in a treat into that Klirishin and keep it there for a minute, this pot that comes out now, is that a Klirishin?
Okay, that's
a cliche. Now, when I do that to pour, is that really Klirishin?
I have to invite you back in a few weeks. There's a taz about that. There's a taz about that whether the ladle is how much is Klirishin. We're probably doing halacha. I'm not sure when.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but if it's Agabi Eish, then in the Tzias it can become a Klirishin.
Yeah, it's still Pesach, so worry about it.
Okay.
No, it's not. It's my day every week.
Every Shabbos is gay.
Make no mistake.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the Pesach.
No, we had a mashgiach that was taking the pot off the fire, wheeling it over to where you have the kasha, sticking in another pot and kashing.
Right, that's what I was saying. That was for Pesach.
I tell you all year round.
He does it all year round.
It's not.
Okay.
People are doing it all year round.
Yes. Okay. The ladle is difficult. Yes. There's what to talk about that. Okay. So let me just say to you this: aside from the Pri Megadim who was machmir the Aruch Shulchan and is machmir, the Mishnah Berurah later only brings one day. He says, he says something like the Torah brings that you have to go. That you have to, if it's Agabi Eish, the Hagala has to be Agabi Eish also. He doesn't bring 2 days. He only brings the one day that you have to be machmir. That the Bliya was Agabi Eish, and the Hagala has to be Agabi Eish. I also will, but it's worth mentioning that the Shulchan Aruch Harav says that Chatchila you should be machmir. But he says for Pesach you could be Meko. His svara for why Pesach Mekos I don't clearly understand. We could talk about that afterwards. But he says that for Pesach you could be makel, that even if the bli was a gabi ish, that'll save you. If the bli was a gabi ish, if the bli is a gabi ish, then you can kasher shlo gabi ish also for Pesach. Okay.
On Pesach or before Pesach?
We're not allowed to kasher anything on Pesach. It's kashering for chametz, to get the blias of chametz out of something. Okay? It's only worth remembering, I know this is going to sound funny, in the last thing, they said if you want to kasher things from milchus to fleishing, you should wait till Pesach, because then you have to kasher anyhow, then you're going to kasher anyhow. Once you kasher, then you can do whatever you want with it. So if you sign on these kind of coolers, then you can't do that. Okay. Then you can't make it back from milchus to fleishing. You have to pick and choose what you want. Okay, so now, this thing that we said, that if the bli have like gabi eish, you have to kasher gabi eish, is not negated to so many cases that I can think of. I know not your case. To the normal way people kasher, because for example, usually you do hagala in the same way that the bli happens. When do we, in the same kind of a kli, the same kind of a kettle? So if it was hagabi eish, it's hagabi, or shaloi hagabi eish, shaloi hagabi eish. The times that we want to do kli rishon, even though the bli was not a kli rishon, are two examples that I know of, is a davar gush. We have a chumrah to treat it like a kli rishon, and if a kli sheni was balei a davar chorov, then the Shach says that's also considered like a kli rishon. Okay, the blia of a davar chorov and kli sheni is also like a kli rishon. So in those cases we want to kasher like a kli rishon. Now, davar gush is a case the Pri Megadim says. The Pri Megadim says that the guy cutting his knife, the knife can be kashered shaloi agav eish because the bli happens like agav eish. Well, what do you do with the knife? You obviously stuck it into a davar gush. You don't stick knives into soup, right? You obviously stuck the knife into a davar gush. So davar gush, even though it has the chumrah of a kli rishon, it's not agav eish.
Maybe it's an onion. Yeah, you cooked on the
what? No. Excuse me. The Mechaber says you can kasher a knife, shaloi agav eish. Pri Megadim says that's because the knife was not used agav eish. It was only used not agav eish. Therefore, you can kasher shaloi agav eish. What do you do with the knife, shaloi agav eish? Well, you didn't cut soup with it. You cut a davar gush with it. And even so, he's saying that even though. No, I'm now putting for words. Even though it's a davar gush, and even though that should be treated like a kli rishon, but it's not a kli rishon like gabi eish, then it's logical.
Maybe it was an onion.
What?
Maybe it was a tray for onion.
And therefore,
you have to kasher your knife, but it wasn't davar gush.
So you think maybe I can't bring a right to it. Okay, that's not okay.
So it's a strange case.
Yes, and I'll. Okay, so then you'll just have to rely on the svara. Okay, which we're looking here. The machmirim say you have to do agav eish because the bli have agav eish. There's a special koyach to being agav eish. Well, davar gush doesn't have that, and the klisheni that the davar chorov may have milas to be like a kli rishon, but the agav eish doesn't have. Okay, but we have a very real case, and until preparing for this, I did not think of this, which is we have a real case like this where we don't do this, which is a spray dryer. What's the bli in the spray dryer? The bli happens like gabi eish. The thing is burning hot with heat pouring into it. And I'm not talking about whether it's considered gabi eish for libun. Let's say it's not considered gabi eish for libun. Libun means a burning fire raging inside of the thing. But it's like gabi eish. Come on, there's heat pouring into it. It's 500 degrees in there. It's for sure the bli happens like gabi eish. And it's like an oven. And how do we kasher? Well, an oven is really eish even for libun. But okay, how do we kasher it? How do we kasher the thing? We do hagala. Now, there are questions as to the type of hagala we do. The extended era, that's for a different time, maybe halacha hey. Whether what we do is considered kli rishon. But let's even say it's a kli rishon. Okay, let's even accept that the hagala we do is considered like we're kashering in a kli rishon.
Then we lower the heat?
It's not a gabi eish because you can't have the heat running when you're doing the water, so you might preheat it. Right. So what is it? It's a kli rishon, shaloi gabi eish. It's a kli rishon, and then you turn the fire off. You took it off the fire. So we're kashering the spray dryer as a kli rishon, shaloi gabi eish at most. That's the most.
No, it's an anime guy.
Oh, so I'm saying this is. So I'm saying even the people who try to kasher. I mean, until thinking this through, I never thought of this problem. That even after we solve the problem as to whether it needs leaving or hagala, we decided yes, it needs hagala, and we figured out how to do hagala properly, which is its own chachma to figure out how to do hagala properly. And we did all those things, but l'chara we got stuck over here. That try as we might, it's going to be shaloi gabi eish, and l'chara we're going to be stuck. And don't know anybody who dressed that because I just thought of it.
Did you see Rabbi Lubans? He doesn't dress in like.
I'm going to look at. I will look at his thing again. I just thought of it now. I have to look at it again to see if he told me. Have to make a gabi?
No.
If you can do proper handling with a spray ball and enough water,
yes,
the water's not going to dry. You could let the thing run the water won't dry.
You turn the burner on in the while you're drying.
The purpose is it'll dries up.
That's only because these are atomizer that cuts up the
yes, correct.
Okay, but if you pour from a spray ball, push it going inside.
That's correct. There's places I go to, they can't have the heat on.
Yeah.
They can't. It's just
What they don't do.
I don't know.
Water gets to the wrong places. They just
but nobody. I don't know anybody who ever tried that. So maybe we have to start.
I know that I do it.
You do what?
I do it.
You have to fire on while you're passing.
And the water comes to someone else. Yeah.
You water goes through spray balls there, or it goes through the atomizer?
It goes through the atomizer. The water goes
through
the water. Now the problem.
How hot does the water come out?
The reason is because the water absorbs the heat and it really comes out.
Okay, so good. So you're doing ala ash, not water, and we're doing at least a clean research like ala ash. You're doing that's nothing.
As soon as you use the spray ball and you pour enough water,
okay, there's a point to it.
Yeah,
yeah, we have computerized Ada Binyamin. That's the one thing we do right. Okay, we try. Okay, anyhow, I was really going to do another thing, but I'm not fully prepared on that, which was to explain what we're saying, and that would have answered maybe a question. Depending on how people are feeling next Friday, we'll continue.